Good morning, everybody. Today, we're going to talk about global warming, specifically in ocean temperature. And we've been talking about this topic within my group for the past couple of weeks before the first presentation started. And I'm Christopher.
I'm Haiti.
I'm Nolan.
I'm Angelina.
I'm Trixie.
I'm Kenneth.
I'm Omar.
So before we dive into today's topic, we're going to give you a little preview about what we're going to talk about today. So, as I mentioned before, we're going to be talking about the rising temperature in the ocean and how this disturbs natural environments on Earth, such as coral reefs, polar ice caps, as well as human land. And we're also going to be talking about a concept of albedo later on in the presentation.
So you might be asking, why is this an issue and why should we care? Now, we're humans, we live on planet Earth, and with that being said, 71% of Earth's surface area is covered in water, and water is what we need to sustain our daily lives. That means agriculture, staying hydrated, and lots of other uses. So who's affected? Nearly 40% of large populated cities are on the coast or super close to the coast. And when there's lots of flooding that happens, it damages infrastructures like subways, parks, water supplies, nearly almost everything, roads too. And when there's flooded roads, you can't get places, and then that just makes the city fall apart. So you might be asking what causes this, and that's a decrease in albedo. Now, albedo is a measure of the reflective properties. So the higher albedo is the more reflective it is, and that's stuff like snow, where it's like a 99%. And it's mostly different forms of water, like solid and liquids. And so basically, the higher the albedo, the lower the temperature, so that's why snow is cold, and vice versa. So the low albedo makes a high temperature, and that's what's happening to the ocean right now. It's getting warmer because the snow's starting to melt, so you get less albedo. And animals are also being affected, like this little polar bear over here. Since the snow is melting, it's not used to that climate, so it becomes malnourished and starts migrating towards other areas. And in the process, they can't find fish or food or whatever. And it's just a shock to their system because it's not what they were made for and they're not used to it. So who else gets affected? Coral reefs. In this picture over here, you can see over a course of 18 months how it starts to die out. And what causes this is the rise in ocean temperature causes the coral to expel the algae, which is also what it uses as its food source. So when it gets rid of its food source, it dies, and that supports other fish in the ecosystem nearby. And it also affects agriculture in islands such as the Marshall Islands, where in some areas it's 6 feet above sea level, and with rapid sea level increasing, you can lose like multiple square miles of land just in a couple months. And that's what you can see in this picture here. That area is flooded, same with that. That's what happened to the land that's used for farming. And also because it's the ocean, there's a lot of salt in there, and salt is bad for crops, as you know, so that also damages it.
So how polar bears are being affected? So due to the rising water levels and the increase in the ocean's water, polar bears have been seen to losing their homes and food sources, such as like seals. They depend on seals for their high fat contents because polar bears are animals that require a lot of calories to get around in the day. So studies have shown that in every decade, around 14% of the ice that the polar bears depend on will disappear. And with the polar bears losing their home and food sources, they're having to migrate across oceans or across like large land masses. So for the polar bear journey, so scientists have been placing trackers on the polar bears and seeing and recording the data of the polar bears to see where they're going with all the ice melting. And they've been seen to travel across the oceans or traveling across a large amount of land just to find another place to call home, or just to find a place to find food like seals. Maybe at this point, polar bears have been seen to go onto land just to find nut and berries instead of just staying on the ice. And while these polar bears are on these journeys, they've been seen to lose a large amount of muscle, which they need to capture their food and to travel even further just to find a place to live at. So scientists have predicted that if the ice caps or the sea levels keeps increasing, then 2/3 of the population for polar bears will be gone by 2050. So currently, right now, they're placed as a vulnerable species. But if the ice keeps melting, by the time 2050 hits, they'll be placed as endangered or almost be extinct by then.
Another victim is coral reefs due to the increased temperatures of the ocean. And you can think of a coral reef as an underwater ecosystem. And some good examples are the Great Barrier Reef and the Amazonian Reef. The Great Barrier Reef is actually located on the coast of Australia, the entire coast, and then the Amazonian Reef is on the north of Brazil. So before we get into how corals are affected, you need to understand how corals reproduce in a marine environment. So there are colonies of corals that are called spawners. And this is a huge bunch of corals that actually release gametes, which you can think of as sperm and eggs. And likely there is male and female corals in the marine environment. So they release the eggs or the sperm, and with the ocean currents, they end up floating away, eventually finding each other, and they make a baby coral. But before they make the baby coral, they make a planula, which is basically, you can think of as a human embryo, which is not exactly a baby yet. So it needs to find a hard surface so it can develop and grow. Okay, so we're going to talk about another concept, which is a bleached reef. So you can see in the picture, a healthy coral reef actually has its color, despite what color it could be, but all of them end up in the same result when they die, so they end up being bleached. That looks exactly almost like bone. And on the diagram on the right, so a stressed coral actually ends up releasing its food source. It's a type of algae, and the rise in temperature and the water is what causes that, almost like a sponge, and it releases it into the water. So it ends up decaying because it actually ends up starving itself. Okay, so as I mentioned before, the Great Barrier Reef is a good example, but actually in real time, most of it is being bleached. As you can see in the diagram, the red is actually the most critical points, while the orange is not so critical. But as you can see, the most of it has ended up being very critical stance right now, present time. So coral reefs are actually a place for many marine animals to live. So the main fishes or marine animals that are affected by coral reefs are the ones that are very dependent on it. So there are a couple species of marine animals that actually depend on a coral for refuge from predators. And there are some that are not that affected by coral reefs, such as the great white shark, because that's not very dependent on it. But a good comparison is a city, because of the refuge and natural selection that happens in coral reefs. So if you take away a coral reef, that takes away many hunting grounds for such as sharks, but that also takes away many places for natural refuge for small species of animals, and that causes them to die off, and as well as the species count to lower.
Along with the loss of aquatic and Arctic life, there is also theories that soon in the future, islanders' life will be deeply affected by the rising temperatures and waters going on because of climate change. So, as to reiterate from before, around 40% of largely populated areas and big cities in the U.S. are right by the coast. And while this doesn't mean much to us, as we have large amounts of infrastructure that will only be just damaged or could be taken down, Marshall Islands will lose most of their land. So the biggest thing that this is a problem is because of the agriculture on the island. As many of these 1,000 islands, provide their own food, and these islands are only around 6 feet above sea level, and in the past 30 years, in a study done from 2015, the sea level has risen 1 foot. And while this doesn't sound like much, just 1 foot is making the soil much saltier, which is causing crops to die out. So now the Ministry of Agriculture in the Marshall Islands are doing studies on food and crops that grow on the island to see if hybrid and mutated plants can grow, because the future is looking rather dark because of the rising waters. And the ministry has set out that we make the soil saltier and see what survives, as we know it's getting worse. But already in 2018, they have seen that their crops have begun to die out, specifically a plant called the bread crop, which is most likely a wheat, is beginning to die, and this is unrefuted proof that both agriculture and economy is being killed because of the rising sea levels.
So, as Nolan previously stated, we were going to be discussing the concept of albedo. So, albedo originates from the Latin word albus, which represents whiteness. So, Earth has an approximated 30% of its surface. Is actually 30% of it is albedo. So, that albedo is able to reflect. Well, let me go back. So, Earth's surface has a 30% albedo, meaning that 30% of Earth's surface is reflective. White, the color, is able to reflect. Its property is known for it's known to reflect light. So, solar radiation coming into Earth is approximate. So, solar radiation coming to Earth is mostly reflective. So the sources of albedo are the strongest sources of albedo come from clouds, ice, snow, and forest cover. And the diagram next to it shows how fresh snow has a higher albedo compared to old snow, as well as clouds. Clouds also have a really good portion of albedo. Then comes sand, ice, and forest vegetation, and then at the end, water. Water has the least albedo, so it tends to reflect 10% of all solar radiation or sunlight coming into Earth, while the rest is absorbed. So right here, it shows the diagram how high albedo is able to reflect a lot of sunlight, and while low albedo is able to absorb most sunlight. And the reason why I'm discussing this is because there is a phenomenon known as the ice albedo feedback, which describes how the loss of albedo causes a cycle of the Earth heating up, and basically the limitation of it to reflect sunlight coming into Earth, which Trixie will explain.
So we're gonna go into more detail of what Osmore was talking about. So ice albedo feedback is a positive feedback actually. It's a climate process where a change of an area like an ice cap, snow, water glacier melt down, alter the albedo and surface temperature of the planet. So I will take example like ice for instance. Ice is very reflective. It's like a mirror, as you can see if you step on a piece of ice. Therefore, some of the solar energy is reflected back to space. So ice albedo feedbacks play an important role in global climate change. Sorry for that. So for instance, from higher altitude, we see a warmer temperature melt the ice. And ice sheet, however, the warm temperature, the more it's getting hotter, the ice will melt. So the ice cannot reflect the heat back to the surface. So the planet becoming warmer. So some area that did now have no ice is becoming warmer every single day, which is not good for the planet. Warming tends to decrease ice cover and hence decrease the albedo, increase the amount burning up because we don't have enough ice or glacier to keep the planet cool. Yeah, so this is one of the how the process works. So the worm is melt the ice to the sea, and then it go back up again. It's like a weather cycle. Ice melts, clouds absorb it, and it snow down again. It keep doing that. But if global warming start happening, we don't have any more water. Ice cannot be made, and planet will start warming up again.
So because global warming is such a broad topic, we decided for this presentation only to focus on the rising temperature of the ocean and the effect that it has on different environments. So to summarize, we talked about the melting of the polar ice caps and how this affects polar bears and their habitats. The picture on the right is actually from 1980, and the picture on the left is from 2012. You can clearly see the difference that 32 years has made. And also keep in mind that 2012 was about 7 to 8 years ago, so that time is not being accounted for in this picture. So also we discussed how the high temperature is affecting coral reefs, bleaching them, which is what you can see on the right. And on the left is what's left after it decays. And this, like my classmate explained, it affects the animals that live in there, making them easier prey. And finally, we discussed the rising level of the ocean that is affecting many islands that with time could potentially become submerged underwater. And we also discussed albedo and the decrease of it in the atmosphere, which prevents the Earth from cooling down, and it just creates like a vicious cycle. So in conclusion, the information that we presented to you today was based on scientific observations from scientists who most agree that Earth is potentially becoming hotter and harming a lot of animals and us in the way too. So this topic I think is very important that we learn about because it's events that we could potentially be affected by in the long term, us and animals of course.